And then boom, when I changed like overnight to started eating good fats, and I started with, I reintroduced butter and bacon in my diet. What I cut right away is sugar. And for the first time in 20 years, I was able to really cut sugar because I wasn't hungry and my cravings went away. And I think, like now there's all these books and stuff, but it really is, I was eating good fats again. So I was, fueling my brain, and there's some ketones coming out instead of just kind of sugar in and out or carbs in and out, which especially when you're racing marathons and Ironmans, that's what you're told.
Welcome back to another episode of the Not Almost There podcast. I'm your host, Joe Chura. On today's show, I have Suzie Yorke, who is an entrepreneur, started this company, Love Good Fats, in her 50s. Yes, that's right. She started it in her 50s. She was an Ironman athlete and a CMO for a CPG company, but she was suffering and she was having these ailments from following a diet that she thought she was supposed to be eating. She was suffering from IBS and a bunch of other things. She tried, after reading a book, to embark on this higher fat diet, lower carb, and it changed her life. Therefore, she created this company. And on today's episode, we dive deep into what it's like to create a company from nothing, especially in your 50s as an entrepreneur, some lessons learned. When did she know that this company was going to make it? And then, of course, we dive into the diet side. What are some of the fallacies of the high-fat diet? What can you do today to maybe reduce certain things in your diet to start to feel better? And a whole lot more. I know you're going to love today's episode. Throw on those shoes or just relax and kick back. Please leave your comments, as always, after you listen or watch it. I'll see you on the other side. You have such an amazing story. When I was doing research, and I definitely want to dive into keto, I want to dive into fats, but I really want to understand why you created this company, Good Fats. And I think the audience is going to be blown away when you created it and how you did it. So I'd love to dive into that first, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure. So Love Good Fats really kind of came out of an idea after reading a book on a plane on the way over to the National Product Expo 4 springs ago now, where I realized that after reading this book, The Big Fat Surprise by Nina Teicholz, that I've been misinformed. We've all been misinformed for 40 years. Fats are actually essential, and other than some bad fats, the good fats are really, really key to overall well-being and health. And sugar was the culprit in that one study by Ansel Keys back in the 60s that got the American Heart Association to recommend against saturated fats and cholesterol, and started the whole kind of trend away from fats and moving to low fat instead, which I fell into for 20 years myself. So my health was beaten up from 20 years of low fat and trying to be a single mom and have an executive job and do Ironmans in my 40s. And it just wasn't working because I needed that essential nutrient. So this validated what kind of made sense. And I immediately cut carbs, cut sugar out, and loaded up on fats again, which allowed me to cut sugar finally after trying to be rid myself of sugar for 20 years, which is not an easy feat given how addicted I was to sugar. But then I walked the show and I said, wow, this trend, the front page of Time magazine and New York Times and LA Times, we're all having more and more articles on fat being back and butter on the front page and cheeses and meats and red meat. So I kind of walked the show and said, well, it's one of 3 fundamental nutrients, and someone other than me is going to see this and see that there's an opportunity to inform the world that fats are back and fats are good, the same way as Atkins changed perceptions of protein and low carb in North America, and the same way as Chobani boom, created a billion-dollar brand in the US and changed perceptions. I wanted to fill the shelves with a brand that would change perceptions. And there's lots of books written. I read that book, and then there was 10 other books that came out, Dr. Hyman and Dr. Mercola, and I'm like, I don't need to compete with those gentlemen and write a book. I'm a marketer. I want to create a brand that will play our role in changing the perceptions that fats should be avoided, as indeed that should be the other way around. They should be embraced.
What I was fascinated by is the age of which you decided to create the company. Mm-hmm. You were how old?
Yeah, I think, I was just a few months shy of 50 when I first got the idea. And then by then, what I decided to do as I was nervously walking the show, I had been at the Product Expo for 4 or 5 years. I'd been immersed in the natural space and the distributors, and I've been helping a lot of startup to medium-sized, like $10 to $100 million brands, quite a bit. So I kind of knew the space. I knew the brokers. I'd worked on a lot of the categories and CoQ10 and vitamins and magnesium and a bunch and bars. And I was a VP of marketing for 10 years in weight loss, so more conventional, and at Weight Watchers. So I kind of had pretty much a good kind of background to have me have a lower risk start in terms of knowing what I was doing from a branding and positioning and product perspective. But it was still a big risk. I was a single mom and I was paying child support. I had some savings, particularly from doing a little bit of consulting. It's pretty expensive in Toronto to kind of do it on your own and try to keep your house and all that. So I had a little bit of savings, and I just kind of took a chance. I had some good connections, and I had some early supporters that came in. I raised a little bit. Once I kind of had the idea on paper, I did the same thing as you do in larger, medium, small consumer packaged goods. I started with the positioning that then allowed to do the packaging, then the product brief, and then from then the P&L, the marketing plans, the marketing brief, the go-to-market. Like it all flows out of the positioning. So I started that way and shopped around my idea on a PowerPoint and got enough angel investors to commit to a PO for the first production of the first 2 flavors. And then within 6 weeks, we were selling, like we're number 1 and 2 best selling bars in the big Whole Food stores here in Toronto. And then that gave us the signal that we needed 2 more flavors. So boom, within 8 weeks in January, we had 2 more flavors being produced. And now we had 4 flavors in 4 months. And off we go. Then from then it just took off.
All right. I have to unpack a few things there because it's not easy to go from working for a company to then creating this and just getting in Whole Foods. My first question is, when you were creating this company, were you moonlighting? Were you working full time and then had this idea, and when you're done with work, you'd focus on it? Or did you just put on the brakes and said, I need to focus on this 100%?
Yeah. No, I definitely phased myself in, and I've met a lot of founders now in the last 3 years. I can't tell you how many I've had a chance to connect with, and there's different models. But for me, I was full time in my last CMO job, and then I went to consulting. So I literally for 2 years at one point. I had 4 retained smaller VP of marketing roles because they were smaller brands and they didn't, they needed 10 hours a week of my time and they didn't need, and there's ups and downs. So I was doing consulting in that space, but I kind of knew I'm a brand builder, I'm a marketer, so I kind of loved having a new client, and I hope one day I can go back to doing that. I really loved kind of having a new brand, a new client, and then solving that problem of the brand's not growing or not profitable, and how do we figure that out. So I was doing that, but it was just temporary. In my mind I was oh, I'm not a consultant, but I was paying the bills and saving a little bit of money. And then it was super easy because once I kind of had the idea and I had the positioning. At first I was doing after hours, weekends, and I've always kind of had a pretty pretty big, pretty good work ethic. I get up at 4:45 and I work, and I kind of work through weekends. So folks who kind of know me know I'm a little bit intense there, and kind of really enjoy work, especially in that discovery phase. So I just literally kind of let one retained client go and let another retained client go. So I kind of went from all the hours I was billing to half to then a quarter, and then I just jumped in. But it's still the same, the first year and a half, I think nearly 2 years, I didn't get paid, and then I was kind of paying myself a really small salary at first, just to kind of pay some of the bills, because by then I had kind of pretty much used up all my savings, and then by so when we launched in 2017, we just had 159,000 in revenue in the first 4 months. So it was just still me and a lot of, call it, contractors, $30 an hour, $40 an hour, help me with the packaging and in the PDFs and that kind of stuff that I couldn't do all by myself. But then by 2018 we were 5 of us, but it just took off. So it was just, we were always kind of catching up and kind of behind on the people side. So it was taxing, plus you had to do a lot of different things. So by kind of year 2 I had a little bit of money coming in, and I had some people helping.
Yeah, that's the part, being an entrepreneur, that isn't super obvious. It was years before I created a software technology company, and in 2013 I lost hundreds of thousands of dollars. In 2017 just kept going at it, and that's when things finally started turning around and I could pay myself. But it was years until that happened. But it's not super obvious for people. They see the outcomes of what you've created, and now it's over $100 million in sales. Is that where you're at with the company?
We hit 100 million over the last 3 years. So it's cumulative. We're not at 100 million annual yet. That's our next target.
Well, still, that's incredible that you've created something from nothing and you're at $100 million. So congratulations there.
Thank you.
How did you get into Whole Foods? Was it from your connections being in the business?
Whole Foods is an amazing banner, and they've always been the early supporters of the entrepreneurs, and the whole trend of founders and natural products and better for you products, really between Whole Foods and Sprouts in the U.S. has been game changer. I had with some of the clients I worked with, I had presented to Whole Foods. I was working with I found a distributor and a broker here in Canada through the connections that I had already, a smaller broker, and then there's 2 big distributors in Canada, as there are 2 big ones in the U.S. too, UNFI, and here in Canada Purity Life, and in the U.S. KeHE. So between kind of those connections, I got the name of the buyer. I went online, I filled out the forms, I got an appointment, and I drove over and had the samples in my bag, and pretty much the kind of same story of getting listed at Whole Foods. And Whole Foods East, the division here in Canada, listed me first, and then UNFI immediately lists you once you're listed at Whole Foods, and then I got listed also at Purity Life, the other distributor. So with those 3, you're off to the races in Canada anyway. You have the gift of a proof of concept. So you kind of have the right partners. Then it's going to be, how well does your product sell on the shelf, because you have access to 1,600 stores with the distributors, food stores, natural stores. Those distributors are pretty amazing. So if your product sells well, boom, you're gonna kind of get out to the Canadian market of natural health food stores and the conventional banners that sell in natural. If it doesn't sell well, you'll be in, we were 10 stores at first, you'll stay in 10 stores, but you have the gift of expansion if you have a big idea. And that's what happened. It was just insane. Like the bars were going on the shelf, and I have the first round of packaging. I'm keeping it for when I write a book. It's pretty bad. Like it's the branding's really the box, like the box packaging and the bar, like it's pretty bad in terms of marketing 101. I was just like, oh my goodness, did I really do that? But despite that, like the name and the product was so good and unique and never been done before. I was selling and selling. So we quickly, evolved the formula a little bit. There's a few ingredients we wanted to change because we got some, we were getting, like, I was getting feedback like every day. Like Facebook was mostly the medium back then a little bit of Instagram. But I was literally answering every single DM, answering every single email, every single phone call. Small stores were calling me. Like, I was the customer service voice. So it was easy to kind of get a little bit of feedback. I was presenting to every single natural banner in Canada, and there's a lot. So I was getting tons of feedback every meeting. So evolved the packaging and the product a tiny little bit, launched the second SKUs, and then launched two more. And then the phone started ringing, the largest banners in Canada, the Loblaws, the Walmarts, the Sobeys, all were calling. And then a year later, Costco called. So it just, boom, got a really big, strong, loyal, established brand in Canada in 2 years. So
Is that typical where they call you? Don't you have to normally pitch to them and schedule meetings?
Yeah, but when the word gets around, when you have a hot product and it's selling really well, the word gets around really fast because you have your broker and you have your distributors, and these guys are all in a bunch of different meetings. And in our case, I literally was raising money, angel money, at the same time as presenting for about 2 years. And often by the time I was on like face to face with a buyer, they had, 3 people tell them about our brand. They had seen my post on LinkedIn, and they had like 4 other people saying, whoa, like, have you noticed this, brand on mostly on LinkedIn. So when the brand sells well, and you're in the market, because I was kind of connecting with the right folks to raise angel funding, and also to kind of get help. We were hiring CFO, and we were like, all of the things that happen. The word gets around. The degrees of separation are 1 and 2, that's for sure. So yeah, so the phone started ringing in the US. And that's because those banners were looking at our velocities in Canada and saying, whoa, like those are big numbers. Holy, what's going up north? What's going on up north? And then we got invited to a bunch of innovation shows in the US.
That's an amazing story. Was there a point in time where you knew you were going to make it? Like, was there a report from the distributor showing sales and how your sales would compare to maybe another like product, and you just knew at that point?
Yeah, it's such an interesting journey. We were always kind of like, not sure yet. So I kind of spent 3 years with the wait until and only when will we know that. And I find that, pretty kind of stressful. We're kind of living that with COVID a little bit now, even like, post-COVID, because the COVID has hit the nutritional bars pretty hard. So it's kind of this kind of phase that's now seemingly permanent, that, when do you actually pinch yourself and say, we crossed the finish line? Like in an Ironman,
right,
you cross the finish line, and depending what kind of racer you are, I didn't ever celebrate too early on. When I got to the last mile, that's when, mentally I started really like, holy, this is real. And then I would usually get some tears too. I'll probably get tears just talking about it now. But in business, like, and especially with a startup, it's been like 3 years of like, okay, well, and then once in a while, I kind of just have to whack myself and say, we've kind of built like a like a multi-million-dollar brand in Canada, and we're number 2, 3, depending how you look at the category of brands. Like COVID has slowed things down a little bit, but we've established like a brand. So now it's kind of like, okay, take a big breath, and we're a bit more of a younger brand in the US. So it's a little bit more like, oh, we're a younger brand and we're competing against a billion-dollar brand. But initially, the advice I give to the other founders is initially, it's exactly as you said. I did a lot in my networking saying, like, what's success for bars? And on average in conventional, it's 6 bars per week per store per flavor. And in natural, it's 12. So I had probably 40 data points that I was always kind of saying the same thing. Once you kind of get there, you kind of know that you're robust enough. Another way to think about it is once you get to about 5 million in Canada in bars, like you have an established brand. So unless you do something kind of really bad for a long time or something, like you have enough at those run rates to know that you've created something that will last unless you choose to mess it up, and you continue to do the right things on how to build a brand. But at first it's really hard. Like you have no data, you can ask your distributors, you can ask your retailers, not as much your brokers, but like when you're a small broker, you can ask for data. You go to every single store. I was going to the Whole Foods in my neighborhood every single week, and I had in my notes, I was counting how many bars were sold. I would ask the bar manager, how much did they take from the back and put in the front so I can track. And then I was reporting. We had a little board and some advisors when we didn't have, that many employees. It was just me and those guys, and be like, okay, like look at, all these stores and the banners and, Nature Emporium and Healthy Planet and Whole Foods, how much are we selling at these stores? So you're literally just tracking, week on week, like what's the store staff saying, and sampling to the store staff. When you're a little bit bigger, and we went to a larger broker, Acosta and SS, then eventually we started getting POS report. But even that's kind of tricky because you're only getting your brand, because it's too expensive to buy share data in Canada, so we only buy it like once or twice a year. We buy it weekly in the US, but in Canada it's so expensive. So as a startup brand, you're just kind of like, okay, this is what I'm selling, and then you're like, well, is it good? Right? And you kind of had to rely on your broker and the buyer to say, yeah, for a startup brand, this is really good. Oh, okay, great. And that's your data points. It's you kind of like the first 2 years was kind of like that. And then when we listed in the US, we also had the POS data. And right away, the buyer at the banner, we were at Whole Foods, right? Like we were able to get feedback pretty quick that, we were off to a really fast start. And then you'd get kind of hints as to what some competitors are doing, or we eventually started buying competitive data. But at first you kind of have to rely on a lot of different data points that are not like the big CPG, here's your share summary, and therefore check, if you're on track or not.
Was there an email or communication that you just embraced as a big moment in the company that you just knew you had momentum?
Oh yeah, there is so many. The phone call on June 6th in 2018, when we found out that Whole Foods was going to list us in the US across all their 456 stores. I was at brunch with my daughter, and I got the call that we got the listings in 3 flavors, and literally it was noon, and then a very close board member and investor from day one called me with his wife, and then we ordered the champagne and the orange juice, and he said, get on FaceTime, because he wanted to see my face. That was pretty unbelievable. So I still have that picture. And then coincidentally, I was in Costa Rica on a bus in and out of the mountains on the way over to some sort of like mud something. And we got the call regarding the listings at Walmart in the US. Pretty much all of those calls, though, Sprouts, and Walmart and Kroger and Whole Foods and Wegmans, when you get the calls of listings, like, it's amazing. And then since then, we get the other calls. They started with 3 SKUs. Now they're adding 2. Now they're adding 1. Now they're adding 2. Those are momentous moments. There's really 2 steps. 1, get on the shelf, and 2, turn a lot once you're on the shelf, because if not, you'll be off the shelf. So the first steps of getting distribution can often lead to a multiplier effect to drive your velocities. So distribution is really, really key. And as long as your product sells well enough, the more distribution you get, the more of this like flywheel algorithm happens, because then you can spend more in marketing, and you can spend more in like mass marketing that has a better ROI. Like, you can just kind of reach, in one city, you can reach 200 stores instead of 20. So your
Right.
ROI gets better and better and better as you get more distribution and you grow. It's just this awesome
Economies of
multiplier
scale.
effect.
Yeah, absolutely. That 2018 wasn't that long ago, though. So wasn't there competition with like Atkins and keto type bars then?
No, like, I think the timing worked really well. So I launched in September 17 in Canada, in a couple of dozens of natural health food stores here, and then we expanded really, really quickly. So the Canadian market's a bit different, but Walmart and Loblaws are big players here, and Walmart wanted to have the first PDQ in North America with the words keto on it, because pretty much September keto wasn't really that popular. We started, hearing about it in the blogs and Facebook in January, February, but it was just emerging. There's huge doctor groups here, like 5,000 physicians for low carb. And there was starting to be more and more buzz on the keto diet for weight loss. But that's really just early 2018. And then Walmart had heard enough about it, and they said, like, wow, like, no one in North America has a keto brand on their shelves. So they worked with me. We jumped through hoops. We did things that have never been done before. We wind up with PDQs in May 2018 in Canada with, keto friendly on the front. But it was just
Can you
starting.
explain
It
what
was,
a PDQ is?
a PDQ is the cardboard. So when you go to Walmart, you have the shelf, but then you have those walkarounds, and the walkarounds are really where you can get incremental volume. So it's the piece of cardboard that, like, in the walkarounds, you have to ship your product in that PDQ. Pretty darn quick is the name of it, and you put the same at drugstores. They have a lot of PDQs, so you just ship your product in that box, and then the staff just puts it on the walkaround, so it's temporary. But it's, displays is just game changer in packaged goods. So my advice is always displays to anybody and anybody who will listen to kind of how to win in the store. So we had displays in May, but it was still so early on that it really took, January 2019 is where things blew up in keto and in Canada, and plus we were in 6 Costco stores, and then it just took off from there. So that was January 19. So 18 was just starting in Canada, but we had more and more of the big conventional banners. I think we were on the shelf in September of that year at the Loblaws and the Sobeys. So it kind of took, like, it's a bigger machine. It took a while. But then by January 19, like, it was really starting to take off. And then we were starting the exclusive tests at Whole Foods in Q1 of 19. So, like, that's kind of seems like yesterday now. And, we had fantastic 12 months. We were in one banner, and then UNFI US was, and our sales team was helping us present to the other banners and say, hey, we're on the shelf in this banner. We're doing really well. There was 2 other brands listed, like, in the same POG in Q1 of 19 with us. So it was us and then 2 other brands. And then the buyer put us all in together on the shelf. So there was R3 and then 2 and then 2. So it was all kind of a little section. So the consumer who was looking for keto friendly would go to that part of the shelf. But we didn't even say keto on our bars until like late 19. So we kind of launched with just, the macronutrients kind of speak for themselves, and the consumer would, in bars, like he or she turns the bar around, the box around, and looks at the ingredients. And we had half of them being plant-based and half of them being not plant-based. And they're all gluten-free and soy-free and non-GMO, project verified, and responsibly sourced and kosher. So we kind of hit a lot of the very clean list. And then we eventually put on the box that they were also keto friendly. So it just kind of, 2019 really took off, and then we were off to 2 phenomenal months in January, February, and then COVID hit. And, the nutritional bar category's been hard hit, like from the big brands, I call the big boys brands, and all the way to startups. And startups in the natural space have been hard hit overall. You kind of have a trajectory, and you're building a brand, and you're working in the natural space with your retailers, and the consumer suddenly stopped going to natural banners. They only either shop from home or did 1 trip a week instead of the 4.6 that she was doing prior to COVID. And so you kind of had a bunch of things playing against you when you're a smaller, younger, emerging brand. But we're light is at the end of the tunnel. It looks like the U.S. is ahead of Canada in terms of being able to reopen in a safe and healthy way. And Canada, the news this morning is like, okay, we've now done 30 million vaccines or something, and or 17 million vaccines. So we're kind of halfway caught up versus how behind we were 3 weeks ago. And, I think we're all trying to rush to get people being able to get out there and live the similar of a life that we were living before. It won't be ever the same because we've discovered new habits, but certainly get back out and about for sure.
Going back a second here, or a few minutes, you were talking about your team and not knowing if or feeling like you haven't made it yet, right? And having that, I don't want to call it self-doubt, but you're just not sure at that point.
Yeah.
I thought I could so relate to that because there was a moment in time in our company when I wouldn't even hire people that had jobs, because I was like, I don't want to take the risk of them leaving their safe job to come to work for me. And it was years until finally I was like, okay, I feel comfortable now. And to your point, you're managing so much, and there's so much risk every day when it comes to cash flow, when it comes to product and marketing and people, that I had the same attitude. And I said, don't call me successful until I sell the business, if I were to sell it. But I have news for you, Suzie. Like, what if that were to happen and you're off to an amazing start? Once you do that, you're like, okay, I'm still not successful. Like that's the way I felt about it. It was just this bizarre feeling. But along the way, there's all this risk, and there's all this. There are so many challenges you face as an entrepreneur. It's hard to even quantify them.
Yeah, I think, like, for me, I always kind of climbed these bigger mountains from, like, and I didn't kind of know, like, my DNA and kind of the self kind of awareness that I have now. But it was always like, a little bit of a bigger mountain, and kind of in the subconscious, I think, when this happens then, and that's not the way we all should be living, right? Like, we kind of know, like, being present and kind of celebrating and being proud of kind of what you accomplished, like where you are today and whatnot. But there was always kind of like this climbing a little bit bigger mountain, which I think kind of led me to, running 5K, to doing an Ironman, to doing world championships and doing 11 Ironman. And then kind of this, like, this kind of maybe of like, let's kind of push it a bit. I think as an entrepreneur though, and what's really, really hard when you're launching a brand, there's 98% that don't make it in natural, and 80% of innovation in packaged goods is not successful after 5 years. But in natural, the fail rate is really, really high. So I think you have to have that healthy balance of like knowing what really is like, whoa, like this is a big deal now. And the milestones are like, are you a sustainable brand in natural? Check. Because that is in itself a very real milestone. And if you can kind of achieve that, you know that you have a brand in natural, and just keep doing the basics and you're good. Milestone 1. Milestone 2 is, do you have a brand that's strong enough to survive in conventional? And that's milestone 2. And we kind of hit 1 and 2 really fast. But again, those 12, 24 months, like I don't know when. Then we had milestone 3 for us as Costco Canada, because again, Costco has 10 bar brands listed, and there's 400 bar brands, and there's thousands and thousands of SKUs. So it's kind of like, are we going to be one of the select few at the club that is very discriminate with which ones gets to get a slot and keep a slot for a long time? So that was kind of milestone 3, and then we just slated once we were at Costco, and we started at 6 warehouses and then went to all 100, and then they wanted more and more and more products, and that's a whole other topic. And then you repeat those 3 for the US. So but you really kind of have to know, if you're successful in Canada or in the US and natural, you have a brand, and you can, in Canada, if you're only in Canada, you can't hire as many people as in the US, like you're still kind of small, but you kind of have something. And then depending on how big and how strong that is, you might be able to kind of move to having a sustainable brand in conventional. And it's always a little bit of a race, because the big boys, like the big CPG brands, will eventually wake up. They'll eventually going to say, well, whoa, there's this startup here, Canada, US, whatever, and they've tapped into this. And then they start looking at their market share. And, the first 12 months, they might not even notice you because, you're below the radar. But eventually, you'll make noise and be noticed, and eventually some of them will respond, which is what's happening right now. A lot of the large CPGs are launching brands and line extensions, category extensions that are keto friendly or low sugar, and that's benefiting everybody. Like the fact, like my grandiose plan was to use the brand name to kind of share the word that fats are good and sugars really kind of the devil, and the fact that so many large companies are now shifting to low sugar options and to healthy fats in their mix is really, really good, because it changes. My life has changed. I'm off medication, etc., and that's kind of the message. But it's a share battle out there, so you kind of have to. You have to earn your share of mouth, share of wallet every single day with your consumer. Like you can't wake up one day and say, oh, I earned it yesterday, so I got it today. Every single day, your job is to make sure that your brand has what it takes to earn that share of wallet and share of mouth. And if you stop doing that, even though you had established a good brand in natural or conventional, you'll run into issues. But if you do a good job to establish a good brand, you can have even a few hiccups and still be okay. Although COVID is like a big hiccup, that's kind of throwing a lot of challenges to a lot of founders and a lot of brand builders, for sure. It's not been easy.
We can go hours keep talking about entrepreneurship and building a business and a brand, and it's amazing what you've done. Like, truly incredible, and I could tell just by talking to you for a few minutes that your attitude toward this and your drive is just second to none, and you're gonna keep crushing it. But I wanted to go back to the ailments that you were having, and and the diet component of why fat. So there's a lot of fallacy out there regarding the keto diet and fats. What kind of ailments what kind of issues were you having?
Yeah. From a health perspective, the in my mid 40s is where kind of things started going downhill. I thought I was healthy enough. I was on a low fat diet for 20 years, and that's taken its toll, I'm sure. I was working out every day. I was able to kind of train for an Ironman and cross the finish line once a year in between 40 and 47. I was doing yoga nearly daily, off season and whatnot. So I thought I was kind of doing all the same things. And then mid 40s, I was just struggling with my blood pressure, and it was just like crazy. I was going to see my doctor, and I was like, okay, well, it's kind of going up a little bit, going up, and it was high a little bit during my pregnancy, and I was like, okay, that's kind of weird. And we went through all the checklists, and we eventually thought it must be genetic, because like I was kind of doing the 10 things you're supposed to do, and cutting out salt and cutting out fat and saturated fat and all that stuff. And it wasn't going in the right direction, so I eventually had to get on meds, which was really, really, really disappointing. I really fought hard and was doing everything to try to avoid that. And then I was also having a lot of trouble with my tummy, which is kind of stress related. It's called catch-all as IBS, but I would just, get kind of bloated and miserable, and then I'd be like, oh my goodness, like I just kind of feel like, oh, I have a basketball in there and I just want to lay down, and I just feel miserable, and it was just kind of inflammation. So and we know that inflammation is a really big issue related to nutrition. So inflammation, diabetes, and then eventually cancer, Alzheimer's, all those. But inflammation is a big culprit, along with diabetes that causes obesity. So I just kind of had inflammation, really, and just miserable. So I had medication for that also, and that kind of wasn't working. But I started taking more and more natural products and magnesium, and then I took some I might have had leaky gut also a little bit. So I was kind of trying to explore with that. Magnesium's definitely a must in my diet today, and I do take a couple of other natural products, but I wasn't able to kind of influence it with nutrition. And then boom, when I changed like overnight to started eating good fats, and I started with, I reintroduced butter and bacon in my diet. What I cut right away is sugar. And for the first time in 20 years, I was able to really cut sugar because I wasn't hungry. And my cravings went away. And I think, like now there's all these books and stuff, but it really is, I was eating good fats again. So I was, fueling my brain, and there's some ketones coming out instead of just kind of sugar in and out or carbs in and out, which especially when you're racing marathons and Ironmans, that's what you're told, right? Like glycogen every 10 minutes and eat sugar every 10 minutes to try to get, your glycogen replaced and keep going. So such a big change in the diet allowed me to, and I never really followed ketogenic. I was just near ketosis a few times, but it's just more low carb for me and no sugar. It like overnight, like the first 3 weeks, I was like, whoa, like I feel different. And after about 8 months, I was doing yoga, and I was really, really dizzy, and I was nearly kind of passing out standing up. So I was taking my blood pressure regularly, and then I just took my blood pressure, and it was tanked. It was like I was still on my meds. It was so low. So I called my doctor. I'm like, whoa, what's going on? And he's like, oh, you got to phase off your meds. And it was just, I was just like, wow, like just a shift in nutrition for me. My 2 prescription medications were gone. And that was a bit of a, because I never, I did marketing and the weight loss for 10 years, and I kind of knew ketogenic diet and diabetes, and I read all of the science, and the science was just emerging with inflammation, cancer, Alzheimer's, and all of those. But I never thought myself personally, I can finally, after, 8 years of trying to get off my meds by just, changing my nutrition, but it worked for me. So that's just a big bonus. It makes me a uber believer.
So when you you say you cut out sugar, did you go to literally zero sugar?
Well, I was, a sugarholic. So, I would do a 6 hour bike ride because that night I could have, double the brownie and caramel sauce. And like, I really, really, really crave sugar. I grew up in Quebec and maple syrup, and it was just a really kind of big, I adored sugar. And I try, 5 or 6 times. I'm training for a race. I have a coach. I have nutrition coach. Friends multiple times. Oh, you got to reduce sugar, especially you're trying to race a little bit faster and be a little bit healthier. Like it's not easy to be on your bike for 6 hours or run for 4 hours. Like it's taxing, right? Like so. More nutrition is better. Better nutrition would you feel less miserable, I guess. But I was never able to kind of, the longest I went was 10 days with kind of cutting out sugar, and then my cravings would come back and whatnot. And what I did at first is I kept carbs in the morning. So I was aiming for low carbs, but I was keeping carbs in the morning. I was still having breakfast. Now I fast, so I don't really have breakfast or lunch. I guess I have 2 meals a day instead of 3. But I was still kind of having my carbs. I was just putting a lot of one bagel, putting a lot of fat. So I had the triple layer of fat, I called it, and I've had fat in my coffee now for 5 years, like every day, twice a day. So that was the big change. And then I no longer bought low fat anything. That's banned from my house. And I enjoyed butter and meats that I was anemic half my life, and I'm avoiding red meat, so I'm having to take iron pills, which are really not great. So boom, change all that. That was kind of the first 12 months. And then once I realized, wow, I getting off my 2 medications pretty much at the same time, that kind of happened with a little bit of morning fasting. Like I wasn't hungry like in the morning. So I would just kind of like have my first meal at noon. And now they call it intermittent fasting. When I was younger, they just called it skipping breakfast. And that works really, really well for me. And then I have my first meal, and I really don't eat sugar. Like I try to kind of like I aim for 0, and I probably have that 25 grams a day because it's everywhere. But I'm really, really, really careful because I don't enjoy the taste anymore. So I would do anything for milk chocolate. Like I would just be like, okay, ravaging through the house. I had 2 young kids. Like Halloween was like perfect. There's milk chocolate everywhere for a month. But now, if I have a craving, it's salty. So I'll cheat on salty snacks. Like I kind of crave the satiety of salt and salty anything, and spicy anything. But I really, you'll put a kind of a really, sweet brownie or anything, ice cream. Like Nutella, I used to eat by the spoonful. Like that was my treat. And it's too sweet. Like my body just, the taste buds just changed.
Yeah, it's amazing how it changes over time. What about fruit and vegetables?
The sugar, I really cut out the sugar, and I know this is kind of hard for a lot of folks, but I like it. It's too the vegetables, of course. I have salads every day, olive oil, balsamic, but fruits, I kind of really cut out that first year. I used to eat a lot of fruit, right? Like you would have a bowl of fruit and granola, and kind of thinking that was the healthier breakfast than the bagel and peanut butter. But I don't really eat fruit. Like I kind of started phasing out half the fruits because of my IBS. I was following kind of a diet that kind of helped try to calm the IBS. So, and that, there's half the fruits you should be eating anyway. So that kind of got me eliminating half of them. And then the second half was just like, well, I don't need this extra little bit of sweetness. And it's not something I kind of enjoy anymore. So I don't my kids have lots of fruits. We have the big bag of frozen berries, organic frozen berries, as a staple in our house all day long, and all kids love it, and they eat a lot of fruits. But I'm kind of phased out, and I keep my little treats for some salty, like fried little treats when I'm gonna cheat.
Where do people go wrong on a high fat diet? Because I've seen it go south a few times too, where it almost gives someone permission to eat a lot of just high fat, like bacon and like the lower nutrient type foods. Do you see that as well?
Yeah, well, the keto diet, which is 85% fat, and again, I'm more low carb, so I kind of go 50 to 70 and still enjoy some carbs. Not that many, but still enjoy some. Keto is very, very strict. The science related to reversal of diabetes and now the emerging, there's 10 clinicals on Alzheimer's, there's a dozen on cancer. They're more with the strict ketogenic diet. And to be in strict ketogenic, like you really are just eating, the good fats, it's 80%, 85% of your calories. That's a lot of your calories, really. And very, very limited 25 grams of carbs. So that's hardly anything. You have to watch all carbs, all fruits and legumes and anything that's kind of high in carbs you have to avoid. So, I think if someone is just eating a lot more fat and not cutting sugar and carbs, that's not kind of healthy. Like you want to kind of reduce your carbs and reduce your sugars. Like if you do anything, like aim for zero in sugar, and you really can't go wrong by aiming for zero in sugar. Like there's no downside. There's no research that says, oh, you need sugar every day. You don't, and sugar is sugar is sugar. So I think if you're starting to just eat a bunch of call it fatty foods or fried food, like that's not good fats once you start kind of frying the foods. And you don't cut the other stuff, like that's not really keto or low carb, and that's not really healthy. There's a lot of products on the market right now that claim to be lower sugar. There's products that are 15 grams of sugar, and they're saying, oh, we're lower sugar. That's a lot of sugar in a serving. Like that's insane. Or that have a lot of other not great ingredients, preservatives, and different type of fillers. So, you really have to look at the label, and the cleaner you can eat, the better. The closest to kind of non-process, the better. And even with that, you're trying to kind of find the organic and the grass-fed, like we kind of know what we need to do. Just avoid like the ultra processed and all of these kind of ingredients that are not necessary. We sell a packaged product, and we don't need any preservatives or artificial anything in our bars, but we're still like, a product that's in a wrapper. So it's not like, pure butter or pure sour cream or meats or vegetables, but there's a role for the convenience and for that type of kind of less sweet, very filling, lots of fiber and good fats. So it's kind of part of the mix.
And I know you're an Iron Woman athlete, and I'd love to get into that, but I know we don't have time today on how you started endurance sports like that. But how has this diet helped you with regards to endurance?
Like I can't wait. Like I want to run another marathon. It's just been too hectic. Like 12 months ago, I said, okay, now maybe, and then now I'm kind of saying, well, now maybe this summer. I'm back on my road bike. I'm low carb. I'm fat adapted. It's what it's called now. So my nutrition is entirely different. I never want to touch sugar on a run or a bike again. Only my bars. But I can't wait. Like I'm 54, and I can't wait to race again because I'm convinced I'm going to race faster than I've ever raced. If I just need to put a little bit more of the training in. I've never done a lot of training as a rule because I just been so busy. But I did, not too much training with bad nutrition. Now I wanna kind of go back at it. But and there's more and more research on keto and low carb on high performance, long distance athletes, Ironman athletes, Tour de France champions have been on fat adapted, and then enduro kind of 100-miler runners and racers and world champions. So there's a whole world out there of being fat adapted to improve your performance in long distance. But I'm not a pro. I'm just like an older mom, and I can't wait to kind of get back at it because I want to race with my body being fat adapted, fat fueled versus sugar fueled, and see what happens. But I got to open up a little bit more time.
Has creating the business taken you away from working out, or are you able to still at least work out in the morning? And
yeah, the first 2 years was pretty bad. I had kind of had a lifestyle called an Ironman lifestyle that you just kind of work out every day and 6 days a week, and then you show up. You do a bit more training in the summer, and you show up race day, and that's kind of the weekend warrior type of racer that I was. And then I had 2 years when I started the company that, I would try to keep yoga once a week or twice a week and little 35-minute runs. But I wasn't working out a lot. And that really takes a toll on my mental health because it's a big part of me feeling good about kind of myself and kind of feeling good, just it makes a big difference. But the last year with COVID, one of the blessings with COVID is, I'm at home and then I'm like, okay, I'm going to do 20 minutes of yoga in the living room on a video. Okay, now I'm going to do 20 minutes of running and go out. My days were still pretty long, but I forced myself by saving the commute time and everything. And things have slowed down, right? Like it's just like our hyper growth was growing 5,000%, 500%. And then COVID slowed things down. Plus we had distribution. So I've been able in the last year to kind of get back in shape, not in shape to run a marathon like we just chatted, but I'm on my road bike now. I've ridden it 10 times and I'm this is kind of exciting. So
I have no doubt that you'll be running a marathon at some point.
Yeah, I hope so.
As we wrap, what's the one takeaway that someone could look at their diet today if they're not feeling good or if they're suffer from high blood pressure? What would you recommend that they do?
Yeah, just cut sugar. There's no doubt you can do nothing wrong by cutting sugar. Like just, when sugar's hiding everywhere, guava and sugar this and that and honey and all sugar in your liver, just cut sugar in a big, big way. And for me, I had to increase, fiber and fats to feel satiated. And then that's just kind of changed my whole world. But, my kids, all kids, I think like moms seem to all know, cut sugar. There's no benefit to sugar, and there's so much damage with all the sugar our kids are eating. So cut sugar.
How long does it take before you feel a change or an effect when you cut sugar?
Well, I think, in about 4 weeks, you're at a really, really key place. If you've been able to cut sugar and keep it off for 4 weeks, you're much more likely to not kind of have the cravings anymore. Like it takes a little while. You can start feeling better with a keto diet. You can start feeling better really, really quickly. If you go keto too quickly, you might get the keto flu. But at the 4-week mark of a kind of new eating habit and new nutrients going in and less of the bad ones going in, you'll feel the difference. And then you just have to stick, to stay with it. And you're better to do smaller steps than to try to change everything and then not stick with it, as we all know. Because you want to stick with it.
Well, congratulations on the company. These bars are delicious.
You have to try them in the freezer, try them in the fridge or in the freezer. The majority of our super, super loyal users are all telling us, you could they either keep them in the fridge or the freezer. We have both. My daughter's in the fridge, my son's in the freezer. They taste totally different. The fat kind of tastes different in your mouth, the mouthfeel. Give them a shot there too. It's a totally different bar and a different taste experience, and very, very filling.
I bet this mint one tastes like those mint Girl Scout cookies in the freezer.
Yeah, especially in the freezer. Yeah, the mint in the freezers for sure. The lemon in the freezers, and lemons are a bestseller in many accounts. So it's pretty crazy.
Very cool. How can people get a hold of you if they want to learn more?
Yeah, well, I'm really easy to find. So I'm on LinkedIn. I answer all my DMs myself, and I have a personal Instagram, but I don't use it all that much. So LinkedIn is the place to find me. My email is really easy to find too if you just find me on LinkedIn. But DMs on LinkedIn's the best. The brand's www.lovegoodfats.com. For our website, and we're also on Amazon in Canada and the U.S., and we're in 1,600 doors across the U.S. So if you don't find us, ask the store manager, and often we might be in a different part of the store or harder to find. But we're in more and more stores, and we appreciate all the support.
I love your story. I love your tenacity. I know you're going to crush it, Suzie. Thank you so much for spending time with us today.
Thanks, Joe.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Anonymous There podcast. What an amazing guest, Suzie Yorke. I was blown away. 50 years old, started this company. It's over $100 million all over the US and Canada. Love Good Fats. I went into this episode thinking we were going to dive deep into keto and really focus on kind of a high-fat diet, but it wasn't that at all. It was her practical sense of just eliminating sugar and moderating her carb intake. And I think it was eye-opening, especially for those that are suffering from IBS or brain fog or anything like that. It goes to show you that you can always try something new, and it's obviously worked for her. And she's built an amazing business out of it. There's so many lessons learned in this episode. I could have talked to her forever about the entrepreneurship side and building a business. That is super fascinating to me, but how she did it in such a competitive market is just incredible. I hope you enjoyed the episode. As always, leave a comment. Your feedback is very important. Share it, like it, subscribe, follow, do whatever you got to do. But again, your support means a ton. Until next week, remember, you, me, we are not almost there.